Fucked up Killeen police chief. Another thing we should not discount when they're defending these bastards is the few bad apples argument. When police chiefs and law enforcement leaders use the phrase "a few bad apples" to describe incidents of police misconduct, it feels like a way to downplay the severity of the problem. This phrase suggests that the issue is just limited to just a few people or just a few within force, rather than acknowledging that these incidences might be symptomatic of a deeper systemic issue within these fucking departments. Many blacks have disproportionately borne the brunt of these police abuses. These few bad apples, not this, these few bad apples nonsense is frustrating and is dismissive, and it ignores the widespread nature of the issue. The problem with the bad apples narrative, this phrase, "a few bad apples," it originates from the same, it's actually an abbreviated phrase. The full phrase is "a few bad apples spoils the bunch." When the police officials use this phrase, they are leaving out the part about the spoiling the bunch. Instead, they imply these bad officers are isolated and that the system is just fine. This is problematic because it minimizes the real and pervasive corruption within the departments that have led to a lack of trust, especially with black folks. So when we talk about a few bad apples, it also allows those in power to distance themselves from the actions of these motherfucking officers on the street, rather than taking accountability for their involvement in cultural norms that they foster, that they encourage these, and that encourages these murderous conducts by the police officers. It shifts the focus from their culpability, the leadership culpability, to the idea that simply removing these few bad apples, that it would just simply solve the problem. But if the bad apples keeps popping up, is it really just a few, or has the bunch been spoiled? For Black Americans, the idea that police misconduct is just the result of a few rogue officers feels like a gross oversimplification. This history has left many of us with a deep-seated mistrust of law enforcement, and a mistrust that is only reinforced when we see the repeated instances of brutality and misconduct being dismissed as the work of a few bad apples, and not the fact that the bunch is just as bad. The bad apple phrase is just a fucking excuse by focusing on individual officers rather than the system itself, and it ignores the policies and the culture that allow extreme violence, this goonish, thuggish behavior to occur in the first place. It also downplays the experiences of those of us who have suffered at the hands of the evil empire, suggesting that our trauma is the result of a rare and unfortunate occurrence rather than a widespread issue. When law enforcement agencies, when these bastards fail to adequately address the actions of these bad apples, it confirms the impression that the entire profession is complicit in their behavior, meaning when you fail to address it, only put them on leave or never fire them or whatever the case may be, or find some jigsaw way to justify it, it reinforces, spoils the bunch. In many high profile cases of police conduct, the offending officers were not immediately fired or even prosecuted. Instead, were often placed on administrative leave, allowed to resign, or in some cases were allowed to go get rehired by other police departments. This profound lack of unaccountability, uh, I think that's phrasing wrong. Profound lack of accountability sends the message that police are more interested in protecting these thug ass animals than upholding any sense of humanity. This perception of corruption is reinforced when we see instances of the so-called blue wall of silence, when officers refuse to speak out against their colleagues even when they witness the misconduct. A few bad apples will spoil the bunch. That is the fucking phrase. And the blue wall of silence is the spoiled bunch. That's why I say there is no such thing as a fucking good cop. The culture of silence and protectionism can make it seem like the entire police force, well, not can make it seem like, it makes the entire police force complicit in the cover up of the wrongdoing, which further solidifies with black folk that you bastards shall not be trusted. Now, here's an example of when the bad apple phrase has been used in the media, illustrating how often it's deployed to minimize the perception of issues within the police department. Let's take George Floyd. Despite what you think about the entire case, we all witnessed that man choking that man out. We saw what we saw. And law enforcement officials across the country kept using the phrase "a few bad apples," suggesting that police officer Derek Chauvin actions were not representative of the police force as a whole, which is a lie. This was despite widespread protests and evidence suggesting that racial bias and excessive force were not isolated incidences. How about Breonna Taylor? Following the killing of Breonna Taylor during a botched raid, following a botched raid at her home by the Louisville Police Department, some officials again invoked the bad apples narrative, framing the event as a result of a few officers' mistakes, rather than acknowledging the broader issue with no-knock warrants and racial profiling. What about in 2017, the Baltimore police scandal, in the wake of corruption scandals involving Baltimore Police Department gun task force, where officers were found guilty of robbery, extortion, planting evidence? The department leadership described these officers involved as a few bad apples. If this shit happened in 20, you know how long them bastards had to be doing this, but it's only a few bad apples. Spoils the bunch. Despite the evidence of widespread corruption throughout the Baltimore Police Department, hey, we're just gonna hang this shit around these few bad apples. What about in Chicago in 2014 with the Chicago Police Department and Laquan McDonald? After the Chicago police officer Jason Van Dyke shot and killed a 17-year-old kid, Laquan McDonald, city official, police, the the spokesperson for the police department was quick to call Officer Van Dyke as a bad apple. However, we all know about the fucking Chicago PD and how corrupt they are. And let's not forget, in 2014, Eric Gardner being choked out on a New York sidewalk for selling fucking cigarettes. And those officers, leadership in the NYPD described the police officers who fucking murdered him on a sidewalk as a few bad apples. These examples demonstrate that the bad apple narrative is used to shield and protect a seemingly criminal institution. Law enforcement is a criminal empire in itself, in my opinion. By framing these incidents as a result of individual misconduct, it prevents the rest of us from asking more difficult questions about the system that the systematic issues that plague police departments and the willingness to have these behaviors continue. And I'm saying the reason why they keep the reason why this whole protect and serve, that propaganda, is because the law enforcement field is a fucking criminal empire. It's a criminal empire, and nothing but fucking criminals work for them. And not only do they have a varying degree of criminals in the police department, they got their wing of the police department that is willing to murder in its name. If we keep hearing about bad apples in the police departments across the country, it suggests that that there's something fundamentally wrong. A profession that regularly produces bad apples without addressing the root cause is one that is entirely rotten. But we just got a few bad apples.
I think the narrative that that the police are on some epidemic of shooting unarmed black men is simply a false narrative, and also the narrative that that's based on race. The fact of the matter is, it's very rare for an unarmed African American to be shot by a white police officer.